We'd like to introduce Dean Broyles. He is his dad was a pastor, or is a pastor. He was a youth pastor. He decided that he could probably help the world more through law, so he went to law school. He was trained by ADF. He's trained to fight for religious liberties. He was mentored by Jay Sekulow, one of the nation's preeminent constitutional attorneys. Trained by ADF, Alan Sears, for 40 years. That organization has been providing training for attorneys in every state to help us fight for our freedoms. He has 3 adopted children. His beautiful wife, Shauna, is in the house. He has helped other schools in our area. He lives in Escondido and has helped Earl Warren, for an example. He has been doing this for 18 plus years, I think, and 6 as a nonprofit. And he just helps protect our rights as Christians. And his calling to help, or better, he's actually these days better known as the yoga lawyer. Please welcome Dean Broyles.
Thank you. My mic's working, great. Before I forget, let me mention there are cards on your tables, 3x5 cards. We're going to be giving you a lot of awesome information this morning. It's going to raise a lot of issues and a lot of questions, theologically, probably, and otherwise. So as we're going through the presentations today, take the time to write your questions down so we can get to them quickly when we're done. Before I start my presentation, I just want to ask you to give another round of applause for Jennifer and Steve. And wait a minute, because they were the only couple who together had the courage to oppose what's happening in the local school district. So let's thank them. It's often a problem in the work we do. We have civil rights violations all the time happening in the Christian community. But a lot of Christians are not willing to stand up for their rights. And so it's always wonderful for me as an attorney to actually have clients who are willing to do what's right and to stand up for truth. This morning I will be talking, and I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you quickly. So if something goes by too quickly, we're going to post the PowerPoint online. We can send it to you and email it to you. And we'll have other opportunities in the future where you can be educated. But I have a very little time and have a lot of information to give you, so I apologize for going so quickly this morning. But what I will be covering in the next 30 minutes is what is yoga, and is yoga religious? What does the Bible say about the issue? What is happening in Encinitas? That's already been covered to some degree. I'll hit some high points of that. What about Christian yoga? Okay, our expert witness in the case said to me, Dean, if you talk to pastors about yoga, you're going to have to address the issue of Christian yoga. And I said, do I really have to address that issue? And I do, and I'm pretty confident in addressing it now, but it's a thorny issue for a lot of people. And then questions later, the panel discussion, there'll be a panel of parents and legal and theological experts up here to talk about the issues and answer your questions. So what is yoga? Yoga is one of the 6 orthodox schools of Hindu religion. One of the 6 orthodox schools of Hindu religion. Hinduism, as you may know, is the 3rd largest religion in the world after Christianity and Islam, with 1 billion followers worldwide. It's the oldest surviving religion. And as you'll see from my presentation, and especially Peter's presentation, it's having a big impact here in the United States today. Sanskrit, as mentioned earlier, is an ancient religious language. And the word yoga, we don't know, most Americans don't know what yoga means. But yoga itself is a religious term. It means to yoke or have union, as in union with the divine. The goal of yoga and Hinduism is to escape human suffering. Obviously, in India over the years, there's been a lot of human suffering. And so it was developed as a religion to kind of go within yourself and escape all the suffering around you. If you're into mathematics or a formula, this is my mathematical formula for Hinduism. And it's 1 + 1 = 1. That mathematically does not make any sense, but this is what they believe. That the God within, or the self-God, the Atman, is to be united. The practice and goal of yoga is to unite it with the universal or transcendent God, the Brahman. So the Atman's in you, and you're A, and B is the God floating around in all things in the universe, because they believe in pantheism. And that the goal of the practice of yoga is over time to become in union with the divine and escape reality. So unlike our idea of heaven, Hindus believe that the way to salvation is to reach samadhi, which I'll talk about in a moment, and escape the cycle of suffering and reincarnation. But when they get absorbed into the universal, they don't keep their individual identity. They actually lose their individual identity, and so the person as a person doesn't exist anymore. Whereas in the Christian heaven, our concept is you actually know who you are and you recognize your loved ones who've died before you. So there's a loss of individual identity, which is a very interesting point. There's many scriptures that they follow, such as the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, the Vedas, and the Yoga Sutras, and others. Ashtanga was mentioned. Ashtanga literally means 8 limbs. And so what are the 8 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga that the Joyce Foundation has been promoting in the Encinitas School District? And as was pointed out, was on their wall as a poster. Now they've watered it down under public review and public pressure now, but this is what they were teaching and plan to teach. The first limb is restraint, what we should avoid doing, and that is called in Sanskrit the yamas. The second is observances, or things that you should do, and those are the niyamas. The third, which we'll be talking about a lot today, are the postures, the physical positions, or what is in Sanskrit called the asanas. Then you have breath regulation. This is very important, and breathing has been very important in the district program that they have. And they believe that when you breathe in their type of way, you're not just breathing in air, oxygen, right? In and out oxygen, carbon dioxide. You're actually breathing in a spiritual life force and exhaling that spiritual life force. And they call that pranayama. And I think there's a real popular clothing company called Prana, and that's what it comes from, is pranayama. Withdrawal from the mind. So as you go through the practice, you start withdrawing the mind from the senses, okay? Trying to separate your inner self from the outer world and the outer self. That's pratyahara. Then very important is fixation or concentration. And that's you see that a lot in the chanting of the Om. Om is the resonant sound of Brahman, the resonant sound of God in the universe, right? And so they believe that you're actually channeling God or channeling God's spirit when you chant Om. Or you actually, when you're practicing yoga, you'll fix your gaze on a certain point on the wall or somewhere else to start focusing and clearing your mind and stepping back from reality. And then you enter deep meditation, which is intense contemplation on the object. You continue to focus on the sound or the fixed gaze, and that's called dhyana. Finally, you reach what's called samadhi or bliss, and this is literally absorption into the universal. It's union with the divine. It's, again, joining the Atman and the Brahman. And in the West, we tend to call it bliss, but in Ashtanga, it's called samadhi. And it's, again, a Sanskrit term where you're connecting the inner God with the outer God. And they believe that you actually are divine. And they believe that animals are divine too, which is why they don't eat cows over there. But I'll let others talk more about that. This is a quote from one of our distinguished panelists from a video that came out about 20, 25 years ago called Gods of the New Age. Rabi, who you'll be hearing from later, Rabi Maharaj, says in that a very good quote that's applicable to us this morning. There is not Hinduism without yoga, and there is not yoga without Hinduism. Because we here in the West have been sold this idea that yoga is just physical stretching and breathing, and there's nothing spiritual about it. That's completely false, and we need to understand that. The object of the practice of yoga, this will blow your mind, most people don't know this, is to awaken, move the serpent, okay? Think about biblically what the serpent represents. For them, it represents something good, by the way, and reach bliss or samadhi. So there's this whole concept of kundalini, right? The kundalini is a Sanskrit term, and it's a term for a life force which is represented by a female serpent, which Hindus believe lies coiled at the base of your spine, okay? So picture me up here. There's a serpent coiled at the base of my spine. Shiva is the male counterpart to kundalini and resides at the top of your head or the crown of your head or your brain, top of your brain, okay? And practicing, and so why do they practice yoga? Practicing yoga awakens kundalini, so the serpent starts to rouse and awaken. And as the serpent wakes up, it starts to uncoil, travels up my spine, and as it does, they believe there are 7 chakras along your spine. Chakras, the best way to describe them for purposes of this morning, are spinning balls of spiritual energy, okay? So this spiritual awakening happens in your body and in your spirit as the kundalini travels up and opens up the chakras. So what's the goal of all this? Well, when kundalini reaches the top chakra, the top of your head, she, the snake, and Shiva unite sexually, and that's when you reach bliss or liberation from the cycle of birth and death or reincarnation, okay? So that's the practice of yoga in a nutshell. And there's many other details we could go into. I'm just trying to give you a broad overview. This right here is a picture of Ashtanga being practiced very close to here in Encinitas Yoga, Joyce Yoga Shala. And you can see different people are in different positions, and you can see the gentleman bending backwards with his hands in the praying hands position. Those are just a few of the physical practices, the asanas. So what yoga has already mentioned, what namaste is. Namaste means literally the divine light in me bows to the divine light in you, okay? And what they mean by that is not I'm filled with the Holy Spirit or a spark of God. They mean I'm literally divine. Now, let me ask you people, Theology 101, is that a Judeo-Christian biblical concept that we ourselves are God? No, okay? So when you see namaste on bumper stickers or when people say namaste to each other, you need to understand what that really means. It's Sanskrit for recognizing the God in me and you, which for us is heresy and blasphemy. The asana, the yoga postures or positions, most if not all of the yoga asanas represent the taking the form of, okay, you're putting your body in the form of, a prayer to or worship of a Hindu god. And so asanas are not really primarily meant in India originally as exercise. We've tried to turn them here in the U.S. into exercise. But it's really, you got to understand when you're doing it, whether it's physical or spiritual, you're taking the form of making a prayer to or worshiping a Hindu god. Now, from the book, The Myth of the Asanas, it says, quote, behind each asana and its corresponding movement is an ancient story about a god, a sage, or a sacred animal, okay? Now, the reason I'm quoting from the book Myths of the Asanas is because that book was actually read to the students in their Capri Pilot Project year in 2011, 2012. So they're actually teaching out of the book of the Myths of the Asanas to the children. Okay. I added this to the slides recently. Some of you have seen this presentation before, haven't seen this yet, but you saw it at trial if you were at the trial. This is another series of positions called sun salutations in English, or in Sanskrit, they're called Surya Namaskara A and B. What are they? The series of positions is blatant worship of the Hindu solar deity, whose name is coincidentally Surya. That's why you get Surya Namaskara. And it includes at least 4 or 5 times, if you can see it in the back, I know it's hard, but there's at least 4 or 5 times where the hands are in what the universal praying hands position, okay? And they teach this every day as they start out their yoga practice with the children, the sun salutations. And why do they always start with the sun salutations? Because that's what Guruji, who brought Ashtanga to America in the 70s, taught everybody to start with. So they start with the same opening sequence of Surya Namaskar A and B, and they end with the same closing sequence as taught by Ashtanga Yoga, which includes the lotus position, which I'll talk about next. So again, this Surya Namaskara, or sun worship, is in fact a key part of what they're teaching to the children in the district. Okay, here we move on to the lotus position. What's the lotus position? I can't tell you, since I've taken this case, how many times I've seen this in children's cartoons, and children's programming, and adult programming. You almost can't turn on your TV or watch a movie without seeing people in the lotus position with their hands in the Jhana Mudra and chanting Om. I mean, it's everywhere. And we ask the question, why is that so prevalent in our culture today? And we'll answer that more later. But the lotus position is important because the Hindu god Shiva is often shown in the lotus position in Indian art. The lotus flower is the sacred symbol of purity and enlightenment. The position itself represents a state of deep meditation, which is why they end with it, right? As you're going up the ladder and trying to reach samadhi, that's why you always end typically in the lotus position. And the Jhana Mudra is putting your forefingers and thumbs together and holding them out to the side, typically in the lotus position. They don't just do that for fun. The reason they hold their hands in the Jhana Mudra is because they believe it channels spiritual energy to help them reach samadhi more quickly. And on the left, the gentleman on the left is Sharaith Joyce, who is the grandson of Guruji, and he teaches Ashtanga Yoga over in India. The African-American child in the middle is in the lotus position with the hands in the Jhana Mudra. And if you can't read it in the back, this is a Joyce Foundation website before they changed their name and scrubbed the site as a result of the lawsuit. But it says, it takes more than math and science to raise a human being. Well, the question I have to ask is, what's more? You know, it's probably values, it's probably spirituality, and that's actually what they're referring to. Because the Joyce Foundation, their whole goal is to, in a missionary sense, promote and teach Ashtanga Yoga throughout school districts, not only in the United States, but worldwide. That's their goal, is to indoctrinate the next generation in Ashtanga Yoga. And here's an actual child in the school district, Insidia School District, shown in the lotus position, which they called crisscross applesauce, and shown doing the Jhana Mudra, which they said was brain highways. By the way, in the curriculum that they developed, brain highways isn't mentioned. Okay, they made that up for the trial, just like they made up a lot of things. I mean, they obviously weren't doing crisscross applesauce or sitting Indian style as we learned as kids. They were actually being taught the lotus position. And they kind of admitted that at trial, but they were trying to hide it and camouflage it. So the goal of the practice of this Hana is, why do they do the positions? Is it to get a yoga butt? You know, you've heard of yoga butt. Or, you know, the parents I work with are just going, I can't believe you just said yoga butt to pastors. You know, is it to be healthy? Is it to look good? What's the purpose of yoga as designed? The purpose is to reach samadhi, or union with the divine, or absorption into the universal. And if, Bob, I've offended you somehow by saying the word but, I apologize. This is why I'm an attorney, not a pastor. They wouldn't let me be a pastor. Okay, so yoga is spiritually transformative. This is one of the most important points I want you to remember this morning, if you remember one thing. And it's not just me saying this, it's not our experts saying this. Social science research confirms that spiritual transformation takes place with a mere physical practice of the asanas, whatever your intent is. Okay? A lot of Christians say to me, well, Dean, yoga is just stretching and breathing. I'm not intending it to be religious, so it's not religious. Okay? That's very kind of new agey and very postmodern to be able to control what's religious by your intent, right? Something either is religious or spiritual or demonic, or it's not, right? It's what you intend doesn't control what's actually happening. And the social science research proves this. A lot of Christians start doing yoga at the YMCA, and they say it's just stretching and breathing. We're not chanting. We're not doing the Jhana Mudra. We're not doing all the weird Hindu bell ringing and other stuff. But what happens, folks, and what's proven scientifically to occur is people's intent changes over time. And you ask why? As a Christian, I think we have the answer to that question. The scientists don't know why it happens, but they say it does happen. It's been proven to happen. Guruji Joyce, who brought, again, Ashtanga to Encinitas in 1975, himself said, and he's dead on right, hear what he says, the reason we do yoga is to become one with God and to realize Him in our hearts. But you understand, when he says God or love, he means something totally different from a biblical concept. You can lecture, you can talk about God, but when you practice correctly, you come to experience God inside. Some people start yoga and don't even know Him, don't even want to know Him. But for anyone who practices yoga correctly, the love of God will develop. And after some time, a greater love for God will be theirs. Listen to this. This is chilling. Whether they want it or not. Guruji's telling you your intent doesn't matter. And you know what? The social science confirms it. Here's another quote from his son, Manju Joyce, who I think still lives here in the area. He's married to one of the elementary school teachers at Capri. Is that right? If I'm remembering correctly. But Manju Joyce echoes his father teaching when he declared that when teaching Western students, that's us dumb Americans, I guess, when teaching us Western students, his father did not discuss the spiritual aspect of yoga. Why? Because as you saw by what I told you earlier, Hinduism is very, very hard to understand, right? For us Christians especially. That is why the yoga asanas are important. You just do. Don't talk about philosophy. By philosophy it means don't talk about Hinduism, don't talk about religion. Remember this, 99% practice and 1% philosophy. That's what he meant. You just keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. Then slowly it will start opening up inside of you to automatically draw you into the spiritual path. Those aren't my words, that's a word of the son of Guruji, and he's absolutely right. Religion scholars Sabine Henriksen-Schrempf and Peter Versteeg have noticed that regardless of why people begin doing yoga, a shift seems to take place, leading people to a whole new spiritual awareness and totally identifying over time with yoga philosophy. And some of you who have friends who do yoga have probably observed this because it's very common to see people's worldview start changing and their view of God starts changing and their view of who they are starts changing and their whole theology starts changing. So yoga is religious. Again, this isn't my opinion. I'm going to quote others. It's attractive to Americans. Why? Because we can turn inward to ourselves, right? To the God within. I think that's why it's even very attractive for a lot of Christians, right? Because we kind of do away with the idea of sin, right? Sin is erased as a category of concern because you're God, right? If you're God, you can probably forgive yourself. So sin isn't very important. So yoga is, one thing we need to understand theologically and philosophically is the whole yoga worldview. The Hindu worldview is very relativistic and postmodern. And that leads to some theological issues and problems by itself. Shirley MacLaine, as you recall, maybe 20, 25 years ago, in her Out on a Limb book and video series, was running down the beach crazily saying, I am God, I am God, I am God, joyfully on her face. And I'm thinking, you're committing heresy and blasphemy, you're committing heresy and blasphemy, you're committing, and you don't know who you are, and you don't know who God is. And that's what happens when people start entering into the yoga worldview, is they lose touch with who they are and who God is as people. As practiced in the United States, yoga is, quote, pervasively religious. Whose opinion is that? That is the consensus of religious studies scholars. And these aren't just Christians, folks. These are people from other religions and even atheist religious studies scholars who believe, after studying what yoga is, that it's pervasively religious. And the statement was made that at our trial that yoga, including Ashtanga yoga, is religious. That, again, that's not my opinion. That's the opinion of Judge John S. Meyer after hearing all the evidence in this case, in his ruling. And our expert witness, Candy Gunther Brown, said that Ashtanga yoga is the most religious form of yoga practiced in the United States. So the type of yoga being promoted to the kids is the most religious form of a very religious form. Okay. Why? One thing we found is that there's what I call a Christian theological blindness to yoga. And going back and forth with our expert witness, this is how she explained it. That in America today, there are two broad categories or families of religion. The first is belief or word-oriented religion, which would be Christianity. You know, we believe that our theology matters, what you believe about who God is and who man is, and all of that matters. The second category is practice or experience-based religion, and that is the focus of Hinduism. And what Candy Gunther Brown said is that Christians may not recognize practice experience-oriented religions as religious because they think of religion as requiring that one believe and say certain things, i.e. doctrines or creeds, about who we are and who God is. Yet for many Hindus and yogis, the ritual practice, okay, so just the physical practice, expresses and instills religion even when no words are used, because knowledge of the divine comes by experience rather than intellectual study. Okay? So when we see a religion that's very hyper-experience-based, like yoga is, we don't recognize it as really as religious because it's so different from Protestant Christianity or Catholicism that we don't understand it. And because it's weird, we don't necessarily categorize it as religious. So I'm going to get into a few minutes before I wrap up in a little bit about what does the Bible say? What is God's view about yoga? And I just started searching the Old and New Testaments and really trying to figure out what does God say about these things, and I'll let others address it more later. But the first point is that we are intentionally created and designed by God in God's image. And as created beings, we are distinct from our Creator. While God's Holy Spirit does dwell in us, it is unbiblical idolatry to say that individuals are divine or that we are gods. And yet that's what yoga teaches. Christians should love, worship, bow down to, or obey only the God of the Bible, no other gods. Christians should not worship, bow down to, or even mention other gods. And these scriptures are in your folders. And again, if you want this outline later, I can give it to you. Christians should not worship or bow down to idols. The Bible teaches that idols are connected, as Pastor pointed out earlier, with demonic activity. Christian meditation is a real big difference here. Christian meditation involves focusing on scriptures and thoughts about God, i.e. prayer, not emptying your mind as Hinduism promotes. The spiritual realm, i.e. angels and demons, although unseen to us as believers, is very real. And I can attest that it is very real. Personally, this case, folks, all the cases I've handled for religious liberty in the last 18 years, and there's more information about our ministry on that table and outside if you want to know the other work we've done. There's more spiritual warfare attached to this case than any other case I've handled. One of my good friends said to me, "Oh, it's easy to understand why you're attacking 5,000-year-old demons." And it made me laugh when he said that. It was a kind of funny but true statement. As Christians, our battle is not just against the physical realm, but also in the spiritual realm. This is an important point I want to make, and I wish I had more time to talk about it, but I don't. Some have suggested that yoga is a non-essential or debatable issue, like meat sacrifice to idols or like Christians drinking alcohol, for example. From what I know about yoga now, I say that is categorically not true, theologically or in any other way. In yoga, you are the meat, and you are actually engaging with demonic spirits, whether you intend to or not. And so it's a very different thing. You're actually putting yourself in a position of idolatry. And so your intent, as I said earlier, our intent alone does not control whether yoga is religious or whether it's spiritually significant. Christians should refuse, and this goes to the Sedlocks and some of the work we do, Christians should refuse to submit to the government when it attempts to force them to violate their religious beliefs. And that's exactly what was happening in Encinitas, is that they were trying to force all the kids through this PE program. And they only allowed opting out as they were pressured to do so. Idolatry is a really big deal to God. One thing that the Lord has really showed me over the last year is that in our culture today, in our Christian culture, we don't understand what idolatry is anymore. I think because we all practice it so much, perhaps. And I'm raising my hand there with all of us. But the Lord's really been revealing to me what idolatry really is. But the Lord very clearly says in the first and second commandments, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above or in earth beneath. That's exactly what you're doing in yoga. You're actually putting your body in the form of idol, and you're worshiping idols, or in the waters below, and you shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. I don't think the Lord could be any clearer than that. If you look at the story of the golden calf, obviously in the golden calf story in Exodus, God wasn't really pleased with them bowing down to the golden calf while Moses was up on Mount Sinai getting the Ten Commandments. But look at that story. Be careful not to be ensnared by inquiring about their gods, saying, how do these nations serve their God? Or will we do the same? You must not worship the Lord your God in their way. And then it says in Daniel, this is a great chapter to look at. They trusted in him who defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than to serve or worship any god except their own God. If intent was all that mattered, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego could have avoided the fiery furnace by saying, in our hearts, Lord, we were really bowing down to Jehovah when we bowed down to the image of the king. But that wasn't enough, right? That was an important story in the Bible for a good reason. And then an important verse from Romans 1:25, they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worship and serve created things rather than the creator. And that's what Hinduism and yoga does. It worships created things. Yoga has marketed itself as healthy. It's marketed itself as scientific. And it's marketed itself as spiritual and not religious. And because I'm running out of time, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that. But yoga, initially when it came to the United States, was rebuffed because people saw it as overtly religious. They started relabeling and remarketing things and started gaining ascendancy in the 50s and 60s in the United States especially. But when they say something is spiritual, what they really mean is it's religious, but it's not religious in the way that you crazy Christians are religious, right? With your rules and with your legalism and with your hang-ups and your theology and all that, okay? I'm going to skip that quote from the White House. It's a great quote, though. The White House is promoting yoga nationally, by the way, if you didn't know that. I was quoted in the Wall Street Journal, India, as kind of, they asked me about their program, and I criticized the White House for what they were doing. But this district adopted a $500,000 grant from the Joyce Foundation to develop Ashtanga yoga. The goal was to scientifically prove that yoga works here for kids by taking biometric data from the kids, develop a curriculum, and expand it to all public schools nationwide. A dispute arose after parents objected to Hinduism being taught in the schools. We were consulted. We tried to lobby the board for 5 months, especially the 3 Christians on the board, to even put it up for a vote to consider the issue. They would never even put it up for a vote to consider the issue. So the media started being interested early on. We filed the lawsuit in January. It's gotten international coverage with the New York Times, The Guardian, the BBC, Wall Street Journal India, and many other places. Our goal in the lawsuit was simply to stop Ashtanga yoga from being taught and reinstate traditional PE. God provided us with an amazing expert witness, Candy Gunther Brown, which I could talk about for a long time, but we don't have the time to do it. I just want to be clear what the judge's ruling is, and then we'll kind of move on here. But the judge ruled that Ashtanga yoga, including Ashtanga yoga, is religious. It's a first of its kind ruling regarding public schools. But then he went on to rule that EUSD had somehow, and he never explained how they did it really, but they'd somehow stripped enough religion by making cosmetic changes, removing the Sanskrit terms, and not saying namaste anymore, that they made enough changes so it didn't violate the First Amendment Establishment Clause anymore. But the judge, we actually got the judge to reconsider his ruling, and he admitted that the EUSD opening and closing sequences were identical to Ashtanga yoga. And that's important because what they tried to tell the judge on their side was that they were teaching EUSD yoga, not Ashtanga yoga. In other words, it had nothing to do with the Hindu, Indian Ashtanga roots. They completely reformed and changed it, but obviously they hadn't. There's obviously a double standard here. If this were a Christian-based program, it wouldn't have been introduced to the school, and it would have lasted 5 seconds if it had been introduced to the school. Yes, we're going to appeal the ruling. The Joyce Foundation changed its name. They got so beat up during the trial as a religious Hindu promoting organization that they changed their name after the trial was over to the Sunamut Foundation. But they gave another $1.4 million to the district this year. We expect the appeal to go forward this year, and we expect oral arguments and briefings sometime in the next several months. A national and international conversation has been launched. The case has been covered in Christianity Today, Huffington Post, Fox News, California Lawyer Magazine, legal journals, law review articles, and religious studies professors all over the United States, according to Candy Gunther Brown, are talking about this issue in this case. The key issue, I'm going to skip over this because I want to give Peter enough time. Here's a picture of an actual event that occurred in a spring field trip in the 2012-2013 school year. And you wonder, did the teacher tell these kids to sit on the bench and get in the lotus position and put their hands in the Jhana Mudra? The answer is no. These kids spontaneously, on their own, while they were waiting for another group of kids to catch up with them, got on the bench, got in this position, closed their eyes, and started meditating. Now, let me ask you, I have sons this age. Is that normal behavior, spiritual behavior, for a child of that age to start praying publicly in front of their friends at school? Not really normal behavior. Yet this is what's happening all over Encinitas. On weekends, at play dates. I mean, kids are spontaneously doing this. And the question is why? If it's not religious, why are they appear to be meditating in a very Eastern Hindu yoga way? This is a cartoon that really sums up everything in the case. If you can't see it in the back, it's a teacher standing in the front of the room, and she's holding a book that says Yoga, one of the 6 schools of Hindu religious philosophy or Hindu philosophy. On the wall is a namaste symbol, and right here is a representation of one of the Hindu gods, and then a lady in a yoga position over there. And there's 3 religious children on their yoga mats or near the yoga mats. One's a Muslim, one is a Catholic, and one is a Jewish child reading